Best thing that ever happened to me was coming to America.
This is the story of a boy named Chaim Witz. He was so afraid of hunger, he became the $500 million Gene Simmons. What was the norm for 70s rock bands was an exception for Kiss. In Gene's empire, no one was indispensable. You could be a founder, but hurt the business? You're on the street. We'll show how he turned living people into replaceable costumes, and why rebel ace Frehley still smashed Gene's iron logic in the charts. Forget the demon makeup. Look at the scared kid named Chaim Witz. He wasn't born into the American dream. He was born in Israel, 1949, in a country torn apart by war and dirt-poor living conditions. His childhood was one room, an outhouse, and meat only on special occasions. But the poverty wasn't the worst part. It was the shadow hanging over his family. His mother walked through the hell of Nazi concentration camps. She saw people burned just for existing. She survived, but she brought home a brutal lesson she hammered into her son's head. In this world, you are only safe when you have money and power. Without them, you're a victim. Without them, you get erased. When they moved to New York, that lesson became his religion. Chaim, now Gene, didn't just want to get rich. He had a pathological need to build a bulletproof wall of dollars between himself and his hungry past. While his peers in the 60s were growing their hair out, smoking pot, and talking peace and love, Gene was working, delivering papers, working as a typist, teaching school. He grabbed every paycheck he could find. This primal fear of poverty created Kiss, but that same fear planted a ticking time bomb in the band's foundation. Gene knew he couldn't break through alone. He needed partners. He found them. Paul Stanley was the voice, but the real, wild energy came from two guys off the street, Ace Frehley and Criss. It was the perfect storm. Ace and Peter were true rock and rollers, dangerous, unpredictable, living for today. They had that magic you can't buy. Gene saw it. He knew without their charisma, Kiss was just another boring band. But here was the problem. Gene and Paul were architects building a skyscraper. Ace and Peter were vandals who loved shaking that skyscraper's foundation. In the beginning, it worked. The friction created the spark. But very quickly, Gene stopped viewing his brother's behavior as fun. He saw it as a direct threat to his bank account. When Ace was late to rehearsal, Gene didn't see a creative artist. He saw money leaking out of his pocket. When Peter got drunk before a show, Gene didn't see a friend in trouble. He saw a broken machine on his assembly line. The fear of becoming poor, Chaim Witz again shut off Gene's empathy. He started looking at people as assets. And an asset has one job, to generate profit. If an asset malfunctions, you don't cure it. You write it off and replace it. Gene thought his control was saving the band. In reality, he was slowly choking the humanity out of it, turning a rock gang into a cold corporation. By 1977, Kiss sat on top of the world. To millions of kids, they were the Four Musketeers. Marvel Comics painted them as superheroes fighting evil shoulder to shoulder. The fans bought the Brotherhood hook, line, and sinker. But backstage, a silent coup was already underway. In 70s rock, drugs and booze were the standard, but Kiss was the exception. Or rather, Gene was the exception. He never drank, never smoked, never got high. In a world of chaos, he had a superpower, a clear head, and he used it like a warden, not a friend. While Ace Frehley downed gallons of champagne and Criss drowned in dope, Gene watched. He didn't try to pull them out of the hole. He did something worse. He built a fence around it. Gene and manager Bill Aucoin weaponized Ace and Peter's weaknesses to push them out of command. Gene's logic was cold, hard steel. You can't make decisions, so I will. That was the moment democracy in the band died. Gene turned Kiss into a ruthless corporation. He and Paul Stanley ran the show like a board of directors. Ace and Peter lost their vote. They were turned into hired hands in their own band. This was the crack that killed the spirit of Kiss. Ace Frehley was a musician. He cared about the sound, the riff, the drive. He wanted to be the Rolling Stones. Gene wanted to be Walt Disney. While Ace tuned his guitar, Gene signed contracts for lunchboxes, makeup kits, sleeping bags, and even coffins. Ace screamed, "We're a rock band!" Gene's actions answered, "No, we're a brand." To Gene, The music became just a soundtrack for selling merchandise. He didn't see the Kiss logo as a symbol of rebellion. He saw a trademark to slap on anything that moved. The sickest betrayal? Gene used his brothers' faces to peddle this junk, even when they could barely stand on their feet. The system worked perfectly. The crowd saw four best friends, but the dressing room held two businessmen counting cash and two broken stars who knew they'd been sold out. Gene didn't kill their talent. He did something worse. He shrink-wrapped it in plastic and put it up for sale. The destruction of the band didn't happen overnight. It was a series of precision strikes. Gene didn't just seize power. Methodically, step by step, he stripped his partners of their voice, confidence, and eventually, their faces. The first hit landed in the studio, 1976. The recording of the Destroyer album. Gene and Paul Stanley decided that democracy was in their way. They brought in producer Bob Ezrin, a true dictator of sound. For Ace and Peter, the studio turned into a boot camp. Ace wanted to play intuitively, dirty, and real. But Gene didn't need intuition. He needed a perfect pop record for the radio. If Ace couldn't play a solo exactly as Gene demanded, he was simply cut out. Gene made it clear, "Your opinion is worth nothing here. Play the notes we approved, or we find someone who will." That was the first time Ace and Peter felt like outsiders in their own band. The second hit targeted their pride. 1978, the band decided to release 4 solo albums simultaneously. Officially, it was pitched as a celebration of creativity. But for Gene, it was a competition. He wanted to publicly prove that Kiss was him. Gene hired the most expensive guests and poured huge money into production. He was waiting for a coronation, but something happened that his ego never saw coming. The rebel Ace Frehley's solo album beat Gene in the charts. The song New York Groove became a massive hit. The public voted with their dollars for Ace's sincerity, not Gene's calculation. For Simmons, this was humiliation. He realized his problem assets had talent he couldn't buy. Instead of being happy for a friend, he held a grudge. He decided he would never let them outshine him again. The third hit was fatal. The firing of Peter Criss. When the Catman totally lost control of his life due to drugs, Gene didn't save him. He looked at Peter and saw a broken part. Gene simply replaced his brother with a hired drummer, Eric Carr. Fans were lied to for years, pretending Peter was still in the band, even when other people played for him in the studio. Gene proved his terrible theorem. In Kiss, no one is irreplaceable. You can be a founder, but if you hurt the business, you're on the street. But the scariest, final blow was legal. It was identity theft. Gene and Paul made a move that changed the music business rules forever. They registered the makeup designs as trademarks belonging to the company. Think about that. Ace Frehley's face, his spaceman, didn't belong to Ace anymore. Peter Criss's face didn't belong to Peter. It was Gene Simmons' property. That was the moment the family officially died. Gene turned living people into costumes. Now, if Ace leaves, Gene can just put his face on another guitarist. He didn't just steal their money. He stole their identity. He told them, "You are nothing. The makeup is everything, and the makeup is mine." Gene Simmons won the war. The numbers prove his absolute victory. Chaim Witz, the hungry boy, became a $500 million tycoon. He defeated poverty and built a brand that will outlive him. But look at the stage today to see the cost. Standing next to Gene are not Ace and Peter. They are hired hands, musicians wearing stolen masks, playing stolen notes, asking no questions. For Gene, it is a perfect world. No arguments, no drugs, no chaos, just business. But listen to Gene talk about his brothers. He dismissed them as burnouts, addicts, and broken people. He speaks with contempt, but he never stops talking about them. That is the real drama. Gene built a fortress of cash, but the men who knew the real him are locked out. He exiled them to save the empire. Today, Kiss isn't a band. It is a franchise, like McDonald's. Swap the cashier, and the burger tastes the same. Gene proved rock and roll can be an assembly line. He got it all: money, safety, control. But watch his eyes when he trashes Ace again. It isn't just triumph. It's a man trying to convince himself he was right. Here is the main question you must answer. Did Gene save Kiss by cutting the dead weight? Or did he sell Rock's soul to never be poor again? Was $500 million worth turning his friends into hired clowns?